Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is flip. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb flip used is to mean to move, push, or throw something with a sudden, sharp movement. So sometimes, maybe while you've been watching a movie or a TV show, you've seen a character be angry, and they kind of move, push, or throw an object like a chair, a table. We could use this verb to describe that sudden, sharp movement. A second way, and maybe a little happier way of using this verb flip, is used in connection to tossing a coin. And typically it's done to make some type of decision. So in the United States, what you hear many people say is heads or tails, noting a side of the coin that usually has the head of a president or other significant figure in the United States on one side, and then that of course is the head side, and then tails would be the opposite side. So you might flip a coin to decide who is going first in a game. A third way you hear the verb flip used is to mean to suddenly lose control. And this could be positive or negative. So someone becomes extremely angry or really enthusiastic. I saw a video recently of a person meeting a celebrity, someone they really admired. And we might say that person, if you watched it, they flipped. They lost control. They were having trouble breathing. They were so excited to be meeting this person that they really admired. So this would be that more positive, enthusiastic losing of control. A fourth way you'll hear the verb flip used is to mean to buy or sell something quickly in order to make a profit. In the last 10 or 20 years, there have been many people who have decided to run a business where they buy houses, they make quick improvements, and then they try and sell them. And so you hear this described as flipping. So again, that idea, buy and sell quickly in order to make some money. A fifth way you might hear the verb flip used is to mean to become an informant. So generally this is used to describe where one person who's maybe been doing something illegal or working with some bad people suddenly decides, you know what, I'm going to tell the police, I'm going to tell a government agency about these sort of bad things we've been doing. So when they kind of go to the other side, we say they've flipped. A sixth way you might hear this verb used is to mean to change or reverse one's mind, position, or attitude. We are nearing a midterm election here in the United States, and so you hear many people using this particular verb to describe someone who's decided to vote for a candidate in the other party after maybe having voted for the incumbent, the person who is in the office. So here, the idea kind of they've changed their mind or they've changed their position on some issue. A seventh way you might hear the verb flip used is to mean to turn a somersault, especially in the air. So you might hear this verb, flip, used to describe the action that a gymnast does, or maybe a diver, or some other kind of athlete. So again, it's kind of this idea of someone turning over, somersaulting with their body. You should know that flip is a regular verb. Now, flip is a one-syllable verb that ends with a consonant, then a vowel, and then a consonant. And the rules in English are with one-syllable CVC or consonant-vowel consonant words, we need to double the ending consonant before we add a suffix that ends with or that starts with a vowel, when the suffix starts with the vowel. So for the progressive form of this verb, I need to double my P before I add ing. And that creates the word flipping. Flipping. The past tense and participle forms of this verb, again, are going to require me to add a second P and then add ed. Our base verb, flip, ends in an unvoiced P sound. So my past tense ending is going to make a T sound. It should sound like this. Flipped, flipped. Okay? Now, I know there are already a lot of definitions for this verb, but I've got a few more with some phrasal verbs. The first phrasal verb we're going to discuss is to flip off. You might hear this used to describe someone who's turning off some kind of electrical appliance, or maybe turning off a switch, an on and off switch. So an example of this: he flipped off the light switch before heading to bed. Okay, so again, the idea here, or the meaning, is really turn off. Now, we can of course do the opposite. To flip on would be to turn on some switch or electrical appliance. An example of this: she flipped on the exhaust fan before stepping into the shower, kind of to help with all the steam and moisture that would build up in the bathroom. Another phrasal verb you might hear is flip out. Okay? This kind of goes back to one of the earlier definitions of the verb we looked at. When someone uses this flipped out, it means someone is becoming extremely excited, they're losing control, and again, this could have either a positive, right? They're so happy, they're so excited about something, they're flipping out, or it could be kind of a negative. They're so angry, they're so upset that they're flipping out. An example of this: he flipped out when he saw the parking ticket on his car. So maybe he starts yelling, maybe he starts throwing something. All of those actions might indicate this particular person is losing control because they're upset. Another phrasal verb you might hear is flip over. This can have a couple different meanings. One might be just to turn something over with a sudden, quick movement. An example of this: should I flip the pancakes over, right? So you might think of that kind of pancakes being a really flat, flour-based breakfast item. And in order to cook both sides, you need to turn it over with a quick motion. Otherwise, the batter can get all over the place. A second way we use flip over is to mean that we're turning over from one side to another, or maybe even end over end. So an example of this: that kayak is going to flip over, right? So a kayak is a type of boat, right? And so if I heard somebody say a statement like this, I'm thinking that the person who is in the boat, right, is all of a sudden going to be out of it as the boat goes end over end into the water. Last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to flip through. You'll hear this used to describe someone who is looking quickly, either through a magazine, a book, or some other type of written work. An example of this might be: I flipped through 2 magazines while waiting to be seen for the doctor, right? So in this sentence, someone is not reading very closely and carefully, right? They're just trying to kind of move to the next page as quickly as they can. Now let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the imperative and the simple future. Let's start with the imperative. We use this verb tense to give a command. We're telling someone else to do a particular action. And this is rather unique in English because our sentences do not start with a subject. So it doesn't start with I, you, we, he, she, they, none of that, right? Instead, we can begin our affirmative sentence with just the base verb. And the reason for that is our subject is implied. It's either you singular, if I'm just talking to one person, or I'm writing to one person, or it's you plural, if I'm talking to 2 or more people. So An example of how you might hear this, let's pretend we're playing a card game, and maybe the dealer says, okay, flip your cards over, right? So maybe people were holding them like this, and now they turn them so that everyone can see which cards you had. Now, we can make negative imperative sentences by beginning with do not and then the base verb. You might also hear the contraction don't used. So, another example here. Don't flip out. We're only 5 minutes late. Okay, so maybe you're in the car with a friend, you had plans to be somewhere, and this person really starts to get angry. They start to get upset, right? So you might be giving them this command, don't lose control, right? Relax, settle down. Okay. Now, I want to note with affirmative and negative imperative sentences, sometimes it can feel a bit uncomfortable to tell another person to do a particular action. So instead, you could always add the word please to the beginning or please to the end, and that kind of soften things. It makes it seem a bit more polite. But I always like to remind my students, you do not need to use please 2 times, so just pick once at the beginning or once at the end. So right here, please flip your cards over, or flip your cards over, please. Either one would be fine. But now let's move on to talking about the simple future. Today, we're going to focus on using will. It's very common for us to use will to make predictions. So we're kind of using information to think about what is going to happen in the future. You might also hear it as people make promises or offers. And the nice thing about this verb tense is that our structure is going to be the same no matter what our subject is. So our structure in the affirmative is to start with our subject, then use will, and then the base verb. You can see that example here. The referee will flip a coin to decide who has the ball first. Okay, so it goes back to one of our earlier definitions for this verb. Now, if I want to make a negative simple future sentence, my structure is to start with my subject, then will not, then the base verb. You might hear the contraction won't. W-O-N apostrophe T, won't. And I know there are so many words in English that sound very close to one another, but I always like to stress this is different than W-A-N-T, want, okay? So we're in our negative simple future here, it's won't, okay? So an example sentence, we won't flip any additional houses after we lost money on the last one. So many people who tried to get in this line of work or this line of business found that it can be very difficult to make money. So here, someone might be making a promise, I'm not going to try that again. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we start with will, then we have our subject, and then the base verb. An example here. Will they flip on the balance beam? So here's an example, our 7th, I believe, our last definition of this verb. So this idea of somersaulting, kind of taking their whole body and spinning around. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and a phrase related to our verb flip. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So when we use the noun flip, you'll notice it has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. One way to use this particular noun is just to refer to any act of flipping. So this could be connected to that somersault, could be connected to that coin toss, any of those earlier definitions we looked through. An example here, she did a flip off the diving board. Okay, so that idea, again, of a somersault. A second way you hear the noun flip used is to refer to some type of quick search, maybe through papers or some type of document. An example here. Let me give these recipes a quick flip. Right? So I'm maybe trying to decide, what am I going to cook for dinner tonight? So I'm going to quickly kind of glance. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading each thing. Another related word you might hear is flipper. The first way you'll hear this noun used is to refer to some sort of broad, flat limb. And this generally occurs with animals, particularly animals that are in the ocean. These animals don't really have fingers, so instead they have a flipper. And I've got a picture here to help us. I believe this is a seal, and I'm going to bring my highlighter here to kind of point out, here is the seal's flipper. Okay, so that's one way to use the noun. You might hear that the seal injured its flipper. Right? Maybe from another animal in the ocean, maybe some from debris, trash that's in the ocean. Who knows? A second way you'll hear flipper used is to refer to some flat rubber attachment that is worn on humans' feet, and it helps generally with swimming underwater. So again, I've got another picture to help us visualize this. So that black and yellow thing, that would be another flipper, another example. You might also hear these called fins. That gets used sometimes in the swimming community as well. So you might hear of scuba divers, wearing flippers to help them swim. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is a phrase. It's to flip one's lid. Okay? Now this very much connects back to some of the earlier definitions we talked about. So you might hear this phrase to again describe someone who's losing control, particularly when they are becoming extremely upset or angry. So say when we use this flip one's lid, we sort of lose that positive or that enthusiastic piece of the definition we talked about earlier. So this one definitely has more of a negative meaning to it. So an example of how you might hear this used: he flipped his lid when he was fired. Right? So perhaps the company boss, supervisor, what have you, say, "I'm sorry, you're just not performing," and this person begins to yell. Maybe they push things, they throw things. All of that behavior would sort of connect to this phrase of flipping one's lid. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.